Thanks for clicking into this week's edition of the Friday 5, the weekend look ahead at the top 5 high school football games in the state of Montana. We'll do one for each class. We'll start in Class A, where we've got Bozeman hosting Kalispell Glacier in a matchup of 2 undefeated teams. Both teams have impressive victories to start the season. We'll start with the Hawks, probably the preseason favorite, Will Wire, the quarterback you've probably heard of, having a good start to the season. He leads a Hawks offense that is outgaining opponents more than 2-to-1 yards per game. That Hawks defense was pretty impressive in their season opening, especially in the second half against Billings Skyview. Last weekend, they pitched a shutout against Missoula Sentinel. So the Hawks aren't all offense. That defense is playing well, too. Kalispell Glacier, now they're coming off of an impressive win at Great Falls CMR, that game that had that 3-hour lightning delay after the third quarter. The teams, I believe, took the field again after that delay right around 12:30. The game got over at 1:30 in the morning. Glacier gets a 20-14 win there. Noah James, the running back, 2 rushing touchdowns, more than 100 yards rushing. So Glacier looking good after 2 strong victories to start the season. They'll go down to Bozeman, going up against, like I said, that preseason favorite. So we'll see just kind of how the Wolfpack match up against the Hawks. So that is definitely your Double-A game of the week, although there are some other great matchups out there. Moving on to Class A, I think the best game here is Dillon at Laurel. Dillon coming off that impressive win at Polson last weekend. Kind of the names that you're familiar with, even though they're replacing Terry Thomas, they still have John Kozlowski, Colton Reeby. Those guys found the end zone last weekend for the Beavers. And they'll travel to Laurel. And Laurel, they got a 33-0 win over Stevensville last weekend. Pretty impressive there. That rushing attack doing work again. I think they had 4 rushing touchdowns in that game. So we'll get kind of a barometer there, a comparison of the Eastern A versus Southwestern A. Just kind of see where the strength is in the state this year, because Class A looks pretty wide open. Now moving into Class B, I absolutely love the matchup in Eastern Montana between Glasgow and Baker. The 2 teams met in the playoffs last year. Baker edged out a win there, and both are coming off of lopsided victories to open the season last weekend. I believe the guy in Glasgow, the quarterback, they're expecting to have a big season. Jason Tebow had a nice game last weekend in that game for Glasgow when they beat Glendive. And then you look at Baker. Baker runs the football. Everybody knows that. They had almost 400 yards rushing last weekend. Mason Melby had a couple touchdowns. That game is in Baker on that fancy turf, brand new stadium there. So look for a great matchup between those two, and that one kind of maybe some bragging rights. It's a non-conference game, but 2 teams that have high expectations this year, 2 teams that are ranked pretty highly in the state. Moving on to 8-man, some pretty good games out there too in this class, but I do like the Ennis versus White Sulphur Springs game. We'll start with Ennis. Connor Sullivan, the wide receiver there, had 2 touchdown catches last weekend. He's a Montana State commit. The Mustangs, I think, to me, are the #1 team in 8-man right now. They're a team that has a lot of guys coming back after a deep run into the playoffs last year. A lot of talent, a lot of depth, a lot of experience there. Ennis, one of those teams that's looking to make a run. Right Sulphur Springs, we know about Jory Fisher. We know about Whitley West. Whitley West, a monster on defense. Jory Fisher had a big game last weekend, a lot of catches, a lot of yards, a lot of touchdowns. But the guy that kind of showed up last weekend, Derek Hagan, the junior, accounted for 5 touchdowns. I believe 5 through the air, 3 rushing. White Sulphur Springs runs that wild offense, tough to prepare for. So that'll be an interesting matchup between Ennis and White Sulphur Springs this weekend. Moving on to 6-man, my game of the week, Geraldine Highwood at Denton Stanford Geyser. Geraldine Highwood coming off a monster win at Hot Springs between 2 of the best teams in all of 6-man. Come from behind win for Geraldine Highwood, a lot of turnovers, kind of a sloppy game, season opening game, kind of what you expect, but Wyatt McKinley, Darren Malik, those guys stepped up big for their rivals. This weekend they get another strong test as they go to Denton Stanford Geyser, the new co-op there between those 3 towns. Denton Stanford Geyser, a lot of depth, a lot of guys out, a lot of returning talent, a lot of guys with experience coming back this year. Cade Woodall, I believe he had 5 passing touchdowns, but there's a lot of different weapons there for Denton Stanford Geyser, who, as far as I know, still doesn't have a mascot, but they do have a big game coming up this weekend against Geraldine Highwood.